Soon, the Austin ISD School Board will adopt a budget that closes a $181 million budget deficit by cutting staff, programs, and services across the district. The cuts made to balance our district's budget have had painful effects throughout our community. Schools have closed, beloved teachers are leaving, and parents are wondering what their child's education will look like in the coming years. As the primary caretaker to my 5-year-old grandson, who will start kindergarten next year, the financial situation facing AISD hits close to home. As a former school board trustee, I know this type of situation does not happen overnight and is not the result of a single person or vote, nor is it the sole responsibility of the school board and superintendent. The state has a role to play in this as well. This is why my staff and I have spent the last few weeks researching the history behind public school funding and analyzed the impact state actions have had on local districts. What we have found is not shocking or revelatory. It is what many public school advocates have said for many years. The legislature's investments in the public education system are simply not enough to cover the costs of educating Texas students. In today's video, I will take a closer look at several factors that have contributed to AISD's budget deficit. Let's get started. Before we dive in, I want to briefly and very simply talk about how public schools are funded in Texas. The primary building block of the school finance formula is the basic allotment. As a reminder, this is the minimum per pupil funding amount set by the legislature. From there, adjustments are made to determine how much funding a district is entitled to, based mostly on the students it enrolls. There are several other factors to consider when talking about public school finance: the allotments that districts can receive, the weighted adjustments that change the formula amounts, golden pennies, copper pennies, and more. But for now, I want to focus on another piece of school finance, recapture, and the role it plays in school funding. Recapture is a financial mechanism created by the legislature to make the statewide school finance system more equitable. It ensures that all public schools are able to access the same amount of funding per penny of tax effort. And this is accomplished by ensuring property-rich districts like Austin ISD do not have significantly more resources than what other districts with lower property values can raise. The school finance system first requires districts to collect local property taxes to meet their formula entitlement. If a school district collects tax dollars that exceed its entitlement, it sends the excess revenue to the state. These recaptured dollars are then redistributed to school districts that were unable to meet their funding entitlement using local property tax revenue, and to charter schools, which have no property tax base. It's a way to level the playing field without relying solely on additional state taxes or other state revenue. In other words, recaptured dollars supplant state dollars that would have been needed to fulfill formula requirements for lower property wealth districts and for charter schools. Now let's get back to looking at AISD. To better understand the budget deficit facing the district, I want to briefly discuss where AISD gets the revenue to pay for its budget and what happens to all the money our community pays in school district taxes. Most years, more than 75% of AISD's operating revenue comes from local property taxes. Roughly 12% comes from the federal government, about 6% is funded by other local funds, and the state pays less than 5% of our operating budget. The reason the state pays so little is because Austin is considered a property-wealthy district. And since 2001, we have had to pay into the recapture system. As you can see in this chart, over the years, AISD has paid more and more into the recapture system. In 2023 alone, we spent $900 million to the state in recapture. The reason our recapture payment grew exponentially is that Austin's residential and commercial property values increased, and so did our property tax revenue. Though recent legislative changes have reduced local property taxes and have decreased our recapture payments, it is still a huge portion of AISD's budget. This chart illustrates how much the state collects in recapture and highlights the portion that is paid by AISD. In general, Austin pays more than 1/4 of all the recapture revenue the state collects. Let's now consider the state's role in why AISD has a $181 million deficit. It may surprise you to hear that this budget deficit is not because the district is spending significantly more per student than other big urban districts, nor is it because we are spending a lot more than we did in the past. The data is clear on both of those points. Let's look at the first point. Are we spending significantly more per student than other urban districts? No, we are not. As you can see in this chart, the district's spending levels per student are not much greater than those of other major urban districts. In 2024-25, San Antonio spent the most of all urban districts, followed by AISD. However, the spending difference between AISD and most of the other districts is less than $1,000 per student. Here are some reasons why we spend approximately $1,000 more in operational costs per student. First, I think we can all agree that the cost of living in Austin is much higher than in other urban districts. The reality is that paying teachers and staff enough to live here is a real and consistent challenge for AISD. Second, unlike almost all other school districts, Austin pays into Social Security and the teacher retirement system for all regular employees. We are only one of 18 districts that contribute to Social Security, and it takes an average of $660 in per student spending to do so. Third, a higher share of AISD students are special education students, so the district faces increased costs as a result. As you can see, special education spending accounts for 24% of AISD's operational costs, which is a much larger proportion than the state overall at 15%, charters at 9%, or other districts. For example, Northside ISD in San Antonio spends 17% of its budget on special education, Northeast ISD spends 18%, and Houston ISD spends 14.5%. This brings me to the second question. Is AISD spending way more than we did in the past? The simple answer is no. When adjusted for inflation, Austin ISD is only spending 9% more per student than it did in 2009-10. It took our district almost a decade to recover from the 2011 funding cuts, and we were only able to do so after the state increased its investment in public education in 2019. Unfortunately, this recovery didn't last for very long. The COVID-19 pandemic hit every school district hard, and AISD was not an exception. Schools were closed from mid-March 2020 to October, and like all of us, they had to cope with double-digit inflation. To make matters worse, the legislature didn't increase the basic allotment again for 6 years, leaving districts to contend with the record inflation rates on their own. Let's talk some more about the 9% growth in spending per student. As you may have heard, enrollment in Austin ISD is decreasing, which can cause higher spending per student as some costs are fixed. A teacher with 20 students doesn't get a salary cut because 2 students leave. In the last decade, enrollment has dropped by 16%. In 2024-25, AISD enrolled fewer than 70,000 students. So what happened over the last decade that led to this? Why are students leaving AISD? Well, the most cited reasons for decreased enrollment are: 1, charter schools were created 30 years ago to provide flexibility through laboratories of innovation. School districts have since had to compete with public charter schools for students. Over the last decade, charter school enrollment in Austin has increased from 9,000 to over 15,000. This poses a financial issue because if those students had stayed in AISD, our recapture payment would have been lower, and AISD would have generated about $7.5 million in state aid, plus additional local and federal dollars. 2, the affordability crisis in Austin has hit families hard. Though rents are beginning to stabilize, many families could not afford to wait until prices decreased and moved to more affordable areas like Manor or Del Valle. 3, Austinites, like many other Americans, are simply choosing to have fewer children, if any at all. 4, recent ICE activity has impacted families across our community. Many parents have chosen to keep their children at home or to move away. This past year, approximately 3,000 AISD students stopped going to school due to immigration enforcement activities on school campuses. As heartbreaking as it already is, we anticipate it will increase as more families choose to move away or are deported. The final consideration that I want to discuss is how special education enrollment has impacted the budget. Though AISD's overall enrollment has declined since it peaked in 2012-2013, special education student enrollment actually increased by 54% over that same time period. This increase is due to a number of factors. First, in 2016, the state removed its illegal and arbitrary cap on special education enrollment. Then, in March 2023, the state threatened to take over AISD because too many students were being denied equitable access to special education services. So the district had to implement changes to make special education evaluations and services more accessible. But additional dollars were not provided to help cover the costs, like special education evaluations, which can cost up to as much as $5,000 per student. Even so, AISD has met or exceeded every requirement of its special education agreed order with TEA and has shouldered the increased costs largely on its own. In 2024-25, AISD spent $258 million on programs for students with disabilities, but the state allotments for special education and dyslexia totaled less than $104 million. As you can see, there are many factors to consider when looking at AISD's budget deficit. And as I said before, the situation AISD finds itself in today is not the sole responsibility of current or past school board members. The fact is, over the past several years, school districts across our state have faced a widening gap between state funding and the actual cost of educating students. This is because between 2019 and 2025, the legislature left the basic allotment stagnant while districts had to navigate record inflation. This, combined with everything we just covered and then some, led us to where we are now. The history and data are clear. The legislature has not adequately and consistently funded our public schools, and that lack of funding has often hit AISD disproportionately due to several reasons. Higher cost of living has led to decreased enrollment and higher operating costs. AISD educates a larger population of special education students than other districts and pays a quarter of the state's recapture funds. This is a complex issue that will require a multifaceted approach to solve. Our next video will talk about some steps the state can take to help with finding solutions. Thank you for watching.